months ago, I treated my family to a day of, shall we say, forced family fun. It was my birthday, which is all you really need to know about how I got away with this entire situation in the first place. I decided that for my birthday, I wanted to go hiking with my family. Now, a few years ago, before Esme came along, John and I had hiked Mount Watatic for my birthday, and it's always been such a really wonderful memory that I wanted to recreate it a little bit. John was, let's just say, not completely convinced that attempting to hike a mountain with our toddler was a great idea, but I told him it'll be fine. It'll be fun. Some friends had given us an old hiking backpack for Esme to ride in. So we threw the backpack into the car and packed some water bottles and a few snacks and laced up our tennis shoes and strapped Esme into her car seat and headed for the mountain. About 45 minutes of what should have been a 20-minute drive in, we admitted to ourselves that we couldn't find the trailhead that we had used 5 years before. Just an excellent opportunity to use our problem-solving skills, I told John. We found another trailhead, or at least it kind of looked like a trailhead, and we figured we'd give it a shot. Well, to be more precise, I figured that we'd give it a shot, and John went along with my plan because it was my birthday. John was having some ankle pain that day, so I volunteered to wear the 900-pound baby backpack. We strapped Esme into it. She screamed. I nearly fell over from the odd weight distribution. And the three of us embarked on what we now like to call the great 3.5-hour whining session of 2020. Approximately 2 minutes and 14 seconds in, John said, "I'm not so sure about this." I rolled my eyes. "It'll be fine. Stop being so dramatic. People go hiking with their toddlers all the time. We can totally do this. This is fun." And we hit the trail. We immediately realized that the path was extremely steep for as far as we could see. "Just a little extra challenge," I said. Esme wailed. I noticed that there weren't any other people around on this trail, which was strange because when we had hiked the mountain a few years before at the same time of year, it had been quite busy. The rocks were slippery with mud and wet autumn leaves. I kept feeling like I was going to topple backwards with Esme on my back, so I compensated by leaning really far forward so that I could use my hands to help me climb the rocks. But then I leaned so far forward that I couldn't stand back up when I needed to. My stomach muscles weren't strong enough to pull both my upper body weight and Esme's entire body weight back up. So John helped me back onto my feet and he said, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" "Definitely," I insisted. "People go hiking with toddlers all the time. We can do this. This is fun." Around the time that I began to realize that what we were attempting to do was actually pretty dangerous, I remembered back where we'd begun the journey, seeing and ignoring this old crooked, rusty sign right at the trailhead that said, "Trail closed." Honestly, I just figured the sign was old and out of date. By this point, John and I had both slipped off all of our extra layers, and we were both sweating profusely and really starting to wonder if we had cell phone service, if something happened, how we were going to get help. I quickly became thankful in a different way that no one else was on the trail with us that morning, because any notion of peacefully communing with nature was slashed by the sound of my daughter's persistent whining. She wanted a snack. She wanted a different snack. She wanted water. Oh no, she wanted my water. She wanted to get out of the backpack. She wanted to get back into the backpack. She wanted to walk. She wanted to sit. She wanted to cry. "Oh, Esme, isn't this fun?" I kept asking her. "Ah!" she would scream. We made it to the top of the mountain just in time to comprehend the fact that mountaintops are not made for toddlers. Naturally, she wanted to run around, and obviously that wasn't really an option. I tried to compensate for having to restrain her by offering her her favorite snack, a puree pouch. She proceeded to grab it, squeeze it with rage, and project baby food onto both of our faces and all over my jeans. Roughly 90 seconds into my mountaintop bliss, John announced, "Well, we better get going." And this time, I actually knew that he was right, because I knew that if we didn't get home in time for Esme to take her nap, she was only going to get more and more and more grumpy. But before we headed on our way, I wanted a photo of the three of us to commemorate this wonderful birthday celebration. John held the camera. I held Esme. She kicked and screamed and attempted to squirm her little body out of my grasp. "Esme, isn't this fun?" we said, attempting to try to get her to smile. "If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands." We sang and danced like a couple of crazy people. Girlfriend was not having it. As we made our way down the mountain, this time having located the actual trail, Esme continued to whine, and I finally started to admit to myself that perhaps this little birthday hiking trip was not the greatest idea I'd ever had. When we finally got to the bottom of a different trail than we had hiked up, mind you, John checked his phone to see how far we were from the place where we'd parked our car. 2 miles, he reported. Cool. John insisted that he would make the 2-mile jaunt down the highway to fetch the car on his own, while Esme and I waited in the trailhead parking lot. Clearly, he'd had just about all that he could take. Happy birthday to me. When I read the 126th Psalm, it sounds a little bit like an episode in Forced Family Fun. In 6 tiny verses, the psalmist repeats the words joy and rejoice multiple times. It's as if he or she is saying, "Isn't this fun? If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands." The psalm, or song, was written during a time when life was hard. But I don't mean hard like attempting a half-day hike with a toddler. I mean actually, truly difficult. Perhaps something akin to living in the midst of a global pandemic. Perhaps something a whole lot worse. We don't know the exact historical context from which the psalmist was writing. It's possible that God's people were living in exile. It's also plausible that they were engaged in a war, or in the middle of a drought, or a famine, or a volatile political crisis. Whatever the case may have been, the psalmist asks God to restore their fortunes. In other words, God, can't you just make life good again? Can't we just go back to the way that things used to be back in the day? Now, you and I live in a country whose Declaration of Independence declares that all human beings have a right to the pursuit of happiness. Actually, it says all men, but we won't go there. It's a wonderful thing to live in a country that guarantees so many human rights as our own. But I wonder if sometimes we get so caught up in the pursuit that we fail to achieve the actual happiness. Or maybe we do achieve happiness, but then we find out just how fleeting happiness is, like an ice cream cone on a summer's day. Our culture certainly seems to have a preoccupation with achieving happiness. There's even a number one New York Times best-selling book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin, all about how to be happy. When I was growing up, my mom wore Clinique Happy perfume. It came in a clear little bottle with a bright orange lid, and I would sometimes buy it for her as a gift at Christmas. My dad, who fancied himself a protester of American consumerism, would take us Christmas shopping, and he would always joke when we walked up to the Clinique counter in Macy's that we were trying to buy happiness. He thought that he was hilarious. He was silly, but he did have a point. Have you ever found yourself attempting to buy happiness? A new toy, a new accessory, a new shiny thing? Or maybe you've found yourself trying to achieve your way to happiness. A new promotion, another degree, that elusive thing that we call success. Perhaps you are someone who has attempted to numb yourself to happiness with drinking or with drugs or sex or food or TV or any number of addictions. Or maybe you're more the kind of person who tries to perfect your way to happiness. Perfect appearance, perfect house, perfect picture on a perfect Christmas card. There's a million ways to pursue happiness. The problem is that no one has found a foolproof method yet. According to last year's World Happiness Report, Americans are the unhappiest they have ever been. And we consistently, throughout the years, rank unhappier than countries like Finland and Denmark, Norway and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and Germany and the UK. So what is wrong with our pursuit of happiness? And why is it that so often the things that promise to make us happy fail to deliver? In this day and age, any discussion of happiness is not complete without an acknowledgement of the epidemic of depression. The World Health Organization reports that globally 264 million people of all ages suffer from depression. I want to be very clear that depression is not caused by lack of faith or personal failure. Depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. If you think that you might be suffering from untreated depression, I would be honored to talk with you about it. It would be my privilege to pray for you, and it would be my practice to refer you, if you are open to it, to a mental health care professional who can help you get the treatment that you need to get better. In Psalm 126, the psalmist remembers, "The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced." He looks back and he remembers and recognizes that God has been faithful in the past. And then he prays, "May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy." Because he looks back and remembers all the ways that God has been with God's people in the past, the psalmist can trust that God is still with them now and will be with them in the future. That is the difference between happiness and joy. Happiness is dependent upon our circumstances, which we often have no control over. Joy, on the other hand, is independent of our circumstances. We can find joy in even the most difficult and challenging times because we know that God is with us and that God has always been with us and that God has always gotten us through and that God will get us through again. It's the kind of joy that Paul speaks of in 1 Thessalonians when he says, "Rejoice always, Pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. You want to know the will of God for your life? Rejoice always. It's the kind of joy that the prophet Isaiah speaks of when he says that all the people who have been the most unhappy in life, the poor, the brokenhearted, the grieving, the incarcerated, will be blessed with what he calls everlasting joy. Everlasting joy. It's the kind of joy that John the Baptist pointed toward when he declared that God was on God's way. God was coming down to be with God's people. God was coming to live with us as one of us. These scriptures teach us that history goes in cycles of happiness and unhappiness, death and life, mourning and rejoicing, mountaintops and valleys. No one gets to spend their life on the mountaintop. But God does promise that the mountaintop is coming and we will get there. And in the meantime, we can find a deep and abiding joy in knowing that God is with us. And because God is with us, somehow it's all going to be okay.